Is it me, or does it feel like literally all of the shows are closing? Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my Stagey YouTube channel. If you're meeting me for the first time, hello! My name is Mickey Joe, and I am obsessed with all things theatre. And this is my Stagey YouTube channel, where I review the shows that I have been invited to see here in the UK, and I talk about news and drama and industry punditry happening worldwide. If that sounds like the kind of thing that you would be interested in seeing more of on YouTube, make sure you are subscribed. Also, you can go and find me on other social media at Mickey Joe Theatre on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Now, I have had a lot of requests recently to talk about various shows that are closing. I think one of the biggest shocks for West End audiences was the closing announcement for the much-loved show And Juliet, currently playing at the Shaftesbury Theatre, which has just transferred to New York and is about to open officially on Broadway. Now, a few weeks ago, it was announced that And Juliet was going to close at the Shaftesbury Theatre in the West End, and a lot of fans were surprised and very upset by this. This comes on the back of closing announcements for Dear Evan Hansen on both sides of the Atlantic. The production has now closed. For Come From Away, which is closed on Broadway and will be ending here in the West End in January, as well as swathes of other shows, both on Broadway and in the West End. So I've been meaning to make this video for a little while, addressing why it might feel like so many shows are closing at the same time. Is this something normal? Is this a usual thing that we would expect to see? And the answer to that is, in some ways, yes, but also no. It's not unusual for us to see a few shows closing at the same time around the same time of year. I'll talk more about why that is. But also, we are living in very specific and challenging times for the theatre industry, and that has its own implications. Now, I've been prompted to sit down and make this video today because another staple of the West End, The Woman in Black, which has been playing in London for over 3 decades, has just this week announced it will close at the Fortune Theatre, leaving theatre fans flabbergasted. Nobody expects these long-running productions to close, but this comes on the heels of Phantom of the Opera, Broadway's longest-running show, also announcing it would close in 2023. We're going to address these closings as well as all of the other ones I've talked about in today's video, so buckle up. Oh my god, hey, Mickey Joe Theatre here, pausing today's video for a quick offer I think you will enjoy. So often I see in my comment sections that people use my videos to stay up to date with everything that's happening in the theatre world and on Broadway. Now, I only talk about a few topics, and if you want to stay up to date with everything Broadway, then I can recommend the Broadway Maven. Now, as well as curating his own YouTube channel and running online classes about all things Broadway, the Broadway Maven has a weekly Substack newsletter that you can subscribe to, and this has all sorts of articles and fun things about fan culture and think pieces about all things Broadway, current events, past bits of trivia, anything a Broadway fan would enjoy. I've also contributed to the article recently myself. I wrote about Sarah Porkalop's controversial interview about her performance in 1776, and I'm hoping to write more for the Substack very soon. This newsletter is available on subscription for just $5 a month or $36 for an entire year, but for viewers of my channel, I have been given a very generous discount, and if you use the link down below to sign up to it, then you get it for half price if you sign up before December 31st. So there's 2 links down below, one to sign up to it and one to give you a sneak preview as to what it might be like. So make sure you use the link in the description to get a half-price subscription. That's just $18 for the entire year to the Broadway Maven's Substack newsletter. And keep an eye out for some more articles appearing in it shortly from yours truly. Now back to today's video. Now let's talk about some closings. So first of all, I just want to clarify some of the reasons why a show might close. And there's a few different things that can go into this. Generally speaking, it is largely prompted by ticket sales. A show costs a certain amount to run. Per performance, there is a price to put that show on. You not only have to pay actors and crew and all of the staff working in the theatre, as well as royalty payments to all of the creatives who may have worked on that production. But in the UK specifically, we are also living through a cost of living crisis, and it costs just to light the stage, just to heat the theatre, just to operate revolves and machinery. There is a sizable cost attached to every single performance of a show that you see, and at a certain point, if the revenue from ticket sales stops being enough to run that show at a profit, then producers have a difficult decision. They can either decide to prolong the show's run at a loss and try and do something to improve ticket sales, or they can decide to close the show. Occasionally, this decision is taken out of their hands because in some instances, the person producing that show is not the same person who owns the venue, and the theatre owner may decide that their venue is more lucrative than the current show playing there is allowing for, and they would like to make more revenue and more money with a more profitable show. This, I believe, may have been a contributing factor to the closing of the Phantom of the Opera on Broadway. The Majestic Theatre is a huge house that has the capacity and the potential to generate a sizable amount of income and revenue, which the Phantom of the Opera was not currently doing. That is until they announced the closing, and now everyone wants tickets. Always the way. But those last-minute surges of ticket buying that we're seeing for Phantom of the Opera, for the closing performance of & Juliet here in the West End, they are not enough to restore faith in that production's financial longevity, because what a show really needs to guarantee lasting success is advanced ticket sales. Now, something I keep hearing from producers at the moment is that advanced ticket sales have dwindled entirely since the pandemic. The ticket buying habits of audiences have completely shifted. And post-pandemic, immediately, I kind of understood this because we had a lot of sort of gradual theatre reopenings and a lot of cancelled performances due to COVID, a lot of people still getting COVID. It was very uncertain 1 week to the next whether a performance would be going ahead in those early days. So I understand not buying tickets particularly far in advance. We didn't know if the country was going to lock down again. Who knew what was going to happen? We were living in very uncertain times. But those habits seem to have stayed, and it seems as though audience members are buying their tickets a lot closer to performances. In the olden days, advance sales used to be the single biggest indicator of a show's success. When a show was announced prior to social media, you couldn't see the hype about it anywhere. It would be written about in the newspapers, but advance ticket sales, or a show's ability to sell out a bunch of performances prior to its opening night, was a great indicator of a hit. Circling back to a previous point, another example we've seen recently of where a theatre owner has stepped in to prevent a show from extending and force a show to close was with Beetlejuice at the Winter Garden Theatre on Broadway, where the venue owners decided to bring in the revival of The Music Man instead, allegedly under the coercion of producer Scott Rudin. But booking venues for the runs of these shows is a surprisingly crowded concept. Right now in London, we are seeing various shows trying to come in to a limited number of theatres. The musical Amelie, which was running immediately after the pandemic at the Criterion Theatre, would have been able to extend its run and continue playing were it not for the fact that another show had already booked the theatre from a certain date, so they only ever had a limited window of when they could open that show. It didn't close due to poor ticket sales, it closed because Pride and Prejudice sort of already had the theatre booked. Another example of this coming up is Ain't Too Proud, which is going to be replacing Mary Poppins at the Prince Edward Theatre, which is a massive venue, which is a challenge in and of itself. That production is only able to play for a limited engagement because MJ the Musical is apparently going to be playing there afterwards. Sometimes a show may close because the producers simply don't want to extend it any further. A lot of shows that have celebrity casting, where the stars have other commitments, they will only be in the show for a limited time. Think about Prima Facie with Jodie Comer. She was only available for that window. They weren't going to replace her and bring in somebody else. It was very much about her in the West End in that show, so that was a limited run for that reason. Similarly, with The Music Man on Broadway, producers decided not to replace Hugh Jackman and Sutton Foster in their roles. Instead, they are simply ending the production. I am curious as to whether the production with the same leads will attempt to come over here to the West End, perhaps for a summer run at the Coliseum Theatre. Who knows? We will find out. So why do we see a lot of shows closing around the same time? Well, the reason for this is twofold. There are two big times of year, especially on Broadway, when you tend to see a lot of shows closing. One of these is January, and this is evidenced right now by the upcoming closings of Into the Woods, 1776, and The Music Man, and Beetlejuice, and A Strange Loop, and I'm sure there are more if I think about it. This is because the Christmas season is incredibly lucrative for audiences and for ticket sales. December is maybe one of the best-selling months on Broadway, and January is maybe one of the worst. Everyone goes over Christmas in New York, on Broadway, that's a big deal. January, everybody's already spent their money at Christmas, nobody has any money to spend, and nobody goes to the theatre. It's cold, it's dark, it's not Christmas anymore, and we're sad. So shows will stay open for that Christmas revenue, but they will close in January when it's going to be financially more challenging. The other time of year when you tend to see a lot of shows closing is after the Tony Awards. A lot of the time, if a show is struggling, they will try and stay open up to the Tony Awards to see if they win any big categories, because unlike in London, a Tony Awards win can really boost the public profile of a show and can actually turn around a struggling box office. A Tony Award win means a lot more to a show than the comparative success of an Olivier Award win here in the West End. To put it really simply, more people watch the Tony Awards than watch the Oliviers as well. But if a show doesn't win a big prize at the Tony Awards, you will often see it announce its closing very shortly afterwards. We saw that earlier this summer with Paradise Square on Broadway, admittedly with some other factors involved in the closing of that show. Now, we're definitely seeing January closings here in the West End, Come From Away and Mary Poppins and various other shows if I stop to think about it. But what we don't see is these post-awards season closings. As I said, that is because the Olivier Award's not quite as influential to a show's box office success as the Tony Awards. Is that going to change in future? Perhaps. We will have to stay tuned and find out. So I want to talk about a few of the big shows closing now. So Dear Evan Hansen and Come From Away. And there has been a lot of success of these new Broadway shows over the past few years on the back of Hamilton. Dear Evan Hansen and Come From Away and shows like that have gotten really big and have lasted quite a while on Broadway. And that's unusual in and of itself. Broadway is more accustomed to shorter runs and a lot more new things coming in with each season than perhaps the West End is. But for the past few years, you've had new shows opening and opening and opening, and not as many closing. And eventually, this is a bubble that is always going to have to burst. If I was to really analyse both of these shows, I've talked at length in a previous video about why I think Dear Evan Hansen has closed on both sides of the Atlantic. I don't think the film helped. I think post-pandemic audiences aren't really vibing with that kind of a show, something that they know is going to make them sad, even though it's great the way it talks openly about mental health. I just think that wasn't a lot of people's appetite for post-pandemic theatre. I think they were more looking forward to something uplifting and distracting. Come From Away, I think, had an initial boost of popularity after the pandemic. All I remember was people saying they wanted to go back to Come From Away. That was the first show everyone wanted to go and see after the theatre's shutdown was over. But it's never really penetrated the public consciousness in the same way. And for a show to become really successful, you need for the tourists to know about it, as well as all of the theatre people. You need for it to have a broad public awareness. You know, the tourists know The Lion King, and they know Wicked, and they know Jersey Boys, and they know Mary Poppins. They don't yet know Come From Away. And just from a marketing perspective, I always had to explain this show to people. It had great word of mouth. As soon as you get someone to Come From Away, they fall in love with it. I very rarely heard anyone coming away from that show not having enjoyed it, not having had a wonderful, emotional, and moving time. But it's not something that people understand simply from the show's marketing materials. Now, And Juliet is another interesting case, and it suffered a slightly similar fate to Dear Evan Hansen, because one of the contributing factors to Dear Evan Hansen, I think, to its closing, was the period of shutdown. Now, both of these shows opened shortly before the COVID-19 pandemic. They opened at the tail end of 2019, and they were building momentum, and they were building hype, and they were finding an audience just when theatres had to shut down. And this very much deflated the momentum that they had. They both were well represented at the Olivier Awards subsequently, but I did get to speak recently to the owner of the Shaftesbury Theatre when I was on a backstage tour of that venue, and he confided he was 100% sure that that period of lockdown was very much responsible for the early closing of And Juliet. Now let's talk about The Woman in Black. Now, this is a huge shock. It reminded me of when Blood Brothers closed at the Phoenix Theatre. These long-running shows, you do not expect them to close, but we shouldn't be completely surprised by this. We have seen long-runners in the West End having to adapt in recent years. Les Miserables and Phantom have downscaled their productions under the helm of Sir Cameron Mackintosh in order to guarantee their financial longevity. People have debated whether or not that was necessary, whether that was just Sir Cameron Mackintosh trying to make the shows more profitable, but we have seen the Phantom of the Opera closing on Broadway, having not done anything to make itself more profitable. That to me seems like a pretty powerful argument for these shows having taken a necessary step. And with the closing of Phantom on Broadway, I think theatre fans and theatre producers need to wake to the fact that no particular show is safe. It is a challenging time for everyone, whether you are the biggest, most well-known, longest-running show or something very new and unknown. So The Woman in Black has become this staple at the Fortune Theatre in the West End. It originally played some other venues, but this is a small venue. There has been no demand for this theatre. It's just been readily associated with The Woman in Black. You don't even think of this particularly as West End real estate that is available to other shows because nobody thought this was going to go anywhere. Now, The Woman in Black has always tried to keep its ticket costs low in order to entice many school groups and to make the show affordable to students, which is an admirable thing. In the press release about the show's closing, they briefly allude to the fact that this is what has forced them to close, that they are trying to keep costs low in a time of rising ticket costs. Additionally, I would not be surprised if there is not as much budget available for school groups to go on theatre trips to shows like The Woman in Black. And there's also more choice for them now. There's a West End production of To Kill a Mockingbird. That is another text that gets studied in schools. And Inspector Calls is once again touring, so The Woman in Black has less of a monopoly on all of those school groups needing to go and see a relevant GCSE text. At the same time, one show that is going from success to success in the West End is 222, A Ghost Story. And The Woman in Black has not solely relied on school groups. There are other people who buy tickets. I am wondering if some of that market, the people who are looking for maybe a spooky date night show in the West End, something a little bit scary, a little bit darker, they may be going to see 222 instead because it's the newer, more exciting ghost story currently playing in London. Now, 222 is a very interesting case. We have seen that play multiple theatres with multiple different casts over the past few months. It runs for limited amounts of time with different stars from different backgrounds. The producers have been very clever about casting this show in a way that entices in different people to keep it selling well. You've had Harry Potter stars, you've had stars from the music industry, you've had American TV stars, you've had various different people to speak to various different groups. Love Island's Laura Whitmore has been appearing recently in 222 A Ghost Story. And that has what has allowed it to sustain decent ticket sales at 4 different West End venues in the past year, or it's about to open at its 4th, which will be the Lyric Theatre in London. So in such challenging times, when audiences still haven't resurged to pre-pandemic levels, what shows are we generally seeing struggling and what shows are we seeing doing well? Well, there does seem to be a lack regionally for a certain demographic of audience to buy tickets to the more classic shows. Tours like Anything Goes, which was sadly cancelled, My Fair Lady, South Pacific, the upcoming tour of The King and I, they have been struggling or may be struggling because we are not seeing as many audiences for some of those classic shows. My Fair Lady, which ought to have been a sellout success in London, struggled to find an audience at the Coliseum Theatre. When many people in the UK right now are experiencing such financial hardship, they are less likely to want to return to the theatre multiple times or to be able to afford to return to the theatre multiple times. They are going to buy tickets to something that they know they are going to enjoy, which will lead them either to a family-friendly favourite like a Disney show or to something with music they already know that they love, like a jukebox show. And those are the two genres that we see doing well in these challenging times. And yet, even Mary Poppins, popular family show, is going to be closing in January. Now, like I've said before, the Prince Edward is a massive theatre, and I think that is a big contributor to that show's closing. Also, The Drifter's Girl closed at the Garrick Theatre. Now, I had always expected that this show would run for a limited time in the West End and would have much more success on tour. I don't know, I don't have any inside knowledge as to whether that was always the plan for this show, but it wouldn't surprise me. All I can say to you as theatre fans and audience members, if you want your favourite show to stay open, share that show with your friends, recommend it to people, talk about that show, share it on socials, go and see that show for yourself if you are able to. And as we approach the Christmas season, buy theatre tokens, buy vouchers, buy theatre tickets for your friends and family. We are in a place right now where the theatre industry on both sides of the Atlantic needs enormous support. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that it explained a little more about why we are seeing so many closings happening right now. If there are any more closings I haven't addressed in this video that you would like me to explain, let me know down in the comment section and I will do my best. If you really enjoyed today's video, you can use the super thanks button down below to give me a tip. That really helps me as a stagey content creator, or you can go to patreon.com/MickeyJoeTheatre. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!